Order 37 dealt with using a large amount of civilian hostages to force the capture of an individual. It involved suppressing local civilian populations, including mass civilian arrests and civic lockdowns, and then issuing an ultimatum. If the local population does not turn over said individual, all the arrested will be executed. Our story begins inside of a Naboo royal starship flying through hyperspace, as Naboo Senator Padme Amidala is on her way home. Usually when Padme goes home, it is for celebration, relaxation, family time, and overall just time away from her duties in the Senate, trying to halt the constant rise of Palpatine's executive power. But today was different. Today could change everything. Around 3 hours ago, an old childhood friend of hers, named Alani, contacted her with top-secret information. Alani and Padme went down separate paths in their teen years, when Padme began moving toward politics, and Alani constantly expressed her disdain and disgust for all politics, saying the Republic was a corrupt system that could not be fixed. Luckily for Padme, her old friend also hated separatist leadership, so Alani has been more of an activist. In reality, she was what the Republic might call a terrorist. Whatever she could do to disrupt the war effort on either side, she would do it. She lived in the shadows, and Padme hadn't spoken to her in over a decade. But during the war, Alani and her team began investigating Palpatine himself. A year of dead ends would eventually lead them to the old abandoned villa that once belonged to the Palpatine family. It was where Palpatine's father once spent most of his time before his death, and it was also where he kept his greatest secrets. His father secretly had cameras hidden inside of political acquaintances' homes, their ships, and also his own ships, so he could record everything and have blackmail on everyone if need be. It was never revealed to the public, or to his son, Sheev Palpatine, and all these recordings were stored deep in his villa, in a hidden office that Alani and her group uncovered. There wasn't much here of note until they dug deeper into the recordings saved from the Palpatine ship. This was where they would see it. The Chancellor, as a young boy, slaughtered his entire family. It was brutal, hard to watch, but unmistakable. Palpatine used Jedi-like powers, throwing them around the ship, and Alani would show Padme these recordings when she arrived to Naboo. The deaths of the Palpatines had been put into the record books as an unfortunate accident, but now they had the real truth. Palpatine is not who he says he is. He was a murderer with the Force. But there was an upside to this. Across the galaxy, on Coruscant, Chancellor Palpatine was alone in his office after a day of meetings with senators to discuss the war. He was about to check in on Dooku and the Separatist effort when he received a new communication request from Naboo. Palpatine would answer to find a hologram of Padme Amidala, and Palpatine could immediately feel fear, but also strong conviction in her. Padme was on Alani's ship, as it had a long-range transmitter, and something was wrong. He asked the Naboo senator when she returned home. Padme didn't answer. She just told the Chancellor that she's discovered the truth about him. She's just seen a recording from many years ago, from the inside of a Palpatine family ship. She has seen him use the Force to slaughter his entire family. She knows that he is not who he claims to be. Palpatine would incline his head, asking Padme what she hopes to get out of these accusations, and Padme would tell him to step down immediately from his role as Chancellor, or else this recording becomes public. If he stays in his role, she will release the recording, and he will spend the rest of his life in prison. If he steps down, he may have a chance of escape. She would hold up a small disc, claiming that the recording is on the disc. Padme told the Chancellor that he has an hour to step down, and she would abruptly end the message, leaving Palpatine staring into a mirror. And Sidious screamed out, punching the mirror, bloodying his own fist, as he closed his eyes to think. If the Jedi or the Senate sees this recording, his entire political career will end abruptly. Obviously, he couldn't just step down. He was too far deep into his plans to create the Empire. Far more than Padme could possibly begin to understand. And the more Palpatine thought about it, the clearer the answer became. Padme Amidala, and anyone else who could possibly know of this, needs to die before anyone else sees it. And Palpatine knew he had an hour to work with, so he got to work. In recent weeks, protests of the war have begun to grow on Naboo, and outside of the Capitol building is where it was happening the most. A few hundred clone troopers were deployed to the planet as a security measure. Palpatine would use this to his advantage. He would first contact one of his oldest allies that was currently working on Naboo, a man called Saint Pestage, and he would tell Pestage to dress as a normal citizen, infiltrate these protests, escalate them. Pestage would say that it will be done, and out on Naboo, by the lake, Padme and Alani were alone, staring into the water as the sun was beginning to set. Padme was monitoring Republic channels, hoping to see some breaking news. Alani asked who Padme thinks can be trusted in all of this, and why they give Palpatine any time at all. Padme just shook her head. She didn't truly know. Could they even trust the Jedi? Palpatine showed that he knew the Force in these recordings, and there were rumors in the Senate that the Jedi wanted to escalate this war. Perhaps it's a possibility that the Council and Palpatine are working together. Padme and Alani knew they had to hope that Palpatine steps down. They couldn't trust the Jedi. If they sent these recordings to become public in the Senate or in the Jedi Council, they could be quickly hidden away and the two of them would be killed. They didn't know who to trust, and they could only hope they knew what they were doing. For now, they were catching up after many years, trying to distract themselves, when suddenly, an explosion could be heard in the streets above them. Padme and Alani ran up the hill, and they got to the Capitol building, where the war and the protests were taking place. But something had gone terribly wrong. A small Republic landing pad has gone up in flames. Around a dozen clone troopers were killed in the explosion, and around 100 more were running into the zone, surrounding the area, demanding to know what is going on. The peaceful protest of war was quickly evolving into chaos. Saint Pestage, Palpatine's ally, planted explosives on the landing pad, sparking all of it. The leader of the clone troopers here was a clone commander that went by the name Faye. He was known to be one of the more ruthless clones in the entire Grand Army, and as he paced around the ruined landing pad, looking upon the protesters and the dead clones, Faye was angry. He would order his men to form a perimeter so they can find the culprits of this operation. Immediately, Padme and Alani would take off running, knowing they could get to Alani's ship in time to escape, and she had the transmitter there. Padme said they could use it to send the disc to the Jedi, or to a senator that they trust. They have no other choice, and they knew now it was foolish to ever think Palpatine would step down without a fight. Padme had believed that the Republic could still be reasoned with, that even Palpatine, for all his ambition and violence, still operated within a moral framework that she could appeal to. But as she watched clone troopers dragging families into the plaza, she realized with a cold, sick clarity that she hasn't been dealing with a misguided leader or a flawed system. The laws she trusted, the Senate she defended, the procedures she clung to, all of it was collapsing in her mind. This democracy was already dead. It was wearing a mask she'd been too weak to stare away. And in that moment, she stopped thinking like a senator, and stopped thinking like someone who could fix this machine. She would become someone who understands the machine itself must be destroyed or replaced by someone who can do something useful with it. And back in the plaza, Commander Faye would hear his comlink beeping, and he would answer to find Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. Palpatine would tell Faye and all of the other surrounding clone troopers that Senator Padme Amidala is the culprit for this attack. She, and everyone that could possibly be tied to her in any way, must be found and rounded up. So, Palpatine told the clones to execute Order 37. The order entered the clones' minds, and they all understood it. Order 37 ordered the mass arrest of civilians and threatened execution, all to draw out a wanted fugitive, in this case, Senator Amidala of Naboo. One moment, the clones were trying to keep the violence contained, but the moment the order came in, Theed's airspace would snap shut, and the sky filled with gunships hunting for one woman. Commander Faye marched at the front of every column, visor cold, unblinking, repeating the Chancellor's directive as it played across screens and speakers in Theed. Padme Amidala must surrender, or the population will pay. One major thing about Order 37 was that it didn't activate the chips. It relied on the clones' designated loyalty. For Faye, there is no hesitation. It was simply orders in, obedience out. He saw civilians screaming, clutching children, begging to know what is going on, and it didn't touch him. The mission was all that mattered. The riots, the fear, the bodies, they register as metrics of control. Behind him, though, his troopers were beginning to feel the cracks in their conditioning. Many didn't like this, but it had to be done. And deep in the streets of Theed, Padme and Alani would come to a stop. Padme knew she had no choice. She had to surrender. Alani said she cannot. She will be killed. But Padme said it was her or hundreds of innocent civilians. So, Padme gave Alani the disc, and she told her to get to the Senate, find Bail Organa. He will know what to do. Padme turned, running back to the plaza, holding her hands up to surrender. Commander Faye would get to her, putting her in cuffs, then shoving Padme down to her knees, and he would contact the Chancellor. Faye informed Palpatine that they have Senator Amidala in custody. Palpatine said this is good, but she has information that could jeopardize the entire Republic. She, and everyone they've rounded up here on Naboo, including all the civilians, must be executed immediately. Faye said he understands, and he would have his clones form a closed circle around the rounded up civilians, and when it closed, and as the civilians were entering a full panic, Faye would order the men to fire. And after a brief hesitation, blaster fire rang out from around half of the clone troopers, and through it all, Naboo was crying out, the screams, the smoke, the echo of shots fired into terrified crowds. And as the civilians began to fall, a clone called Captain Herndon finally would raise his blaster, but he did not aim for the civilians. Herndon would fire at the merciless clones, taking 3 of them down, fighting back tears as he killed the men that were executing this order without hesitation. At the front of it all, Commander Faye looked down at Padme, telling her that all of this was her fault. Faye lifted his blaster, preparing to fire, but he quickly became distracted when Herndon began taking out the clone troopers, and the circle broke apart. Civilians were able to begin escaping as Herndon and his own loyal men were ushering them away, taking cover, firing at the clone troopers who fired at the civilians. It was a small civil war breaking out between Republic troopers. Commander Faye was then hit in the side by a blast from one of his men. Padme took the opportunity, sweeping Faye's leg, and the commander dropped his blaster as he fell. It became a battle of brothers. One clone named Kolar dropped his former Sergeant Proth with a shaking hand. Another was cut down by a trooper that he shared a bunk and played sabacc with just hours earlier. Herndon rallied whoever would follow him, dragging wounded men behind cover, shouting for an end to the fighting that no one could hear. Behind the collapsing lines, Padme Amidala would grab the dropped blaster from Faye, and Faye grabbed a new one from the ground. They traded blaster fire as they each got to cover, the noise swallowed by the larger fight around them. Faye lunged out of cover eventually, abandoning his rifle, pulling out a vibroblade as it slashed through the air. Padme was filled with adrenaline, fighting with desperation, and the blade from Faye would catch her side, but she barely felt it at the moment. She saw an opening, firing point blank into the chest of Faye, killing the clone commander, as the sounds of his brothers killing each other rang in his ears. And as he fell, Padme looked to her side, realizing the vibroblade from Faye was stabbed into her. As her adrenaline faded, it was replaced by white-hot pain. Her blood was pooling heavily into the grass beneath her. Padme fell to her knees, and everything would go dark. The fighting around her continued, clones shouting and firing, until someone would see Faye's body laying lifeless in the dust. Across the ruined circle, Herndon and the few men still standing on his side would stare down the last loyalists of Faye, all of them breathing hard, surrounded by the dead, scared, unsure what to do, and one by one, weapons would clatter to the ground. No one felt victorious. They felt hollow, sick, and aware of what has just occurred. Chancellor Palpatine ordered them to execute civilians, execute a Republic senator, all for reasons that were unknown to them, simply because he labeled her a threat. Many of the clones followed orders without question. Why? Although the chips were not activated, they were still always active, helping to keep the clones loyal without question. But many of the clones were broken free much more than Palpatine had anticipated. And for now, Captain Herndon would run over to the senator. He began searching for help as she was dying quickly. And out in Naboo, the clones who were not involved in this massacre were only told to lock down the hangars and the airspace above Naboo. They didn't know why, but they had no reason to disobey orders. But Alani also had her mission. She had the disc containing the recording of Palpatine's atrocities. She needed to get it to Bail Organa. So, she snuck into a repair shop and found an astromech. Alani brought the small droid to one of the hangars, and she instructed it to get into Padme's royal starship, set it to autopilot, take off for Coruscant. She told the astromech that this was for the senator, and the droid would listen. The astromech would board Padme's ship, taking off into the air. Within seconds, All of the nearby clone gunships were in pursuit. They warned the pilot many times, but eventually they fired on the Naboo ship, blowing it out of the air. And this distraction was just what Alani needed, as she got into her own ship, flying under the radar of the clones, escaping through the Naboo hills before making a hyperspace jump for Coruscant. Her departure would go unnoticed. Within a couple hours, Jedi and senators from across the galaxy would be gathered in the Coruscant Senate, as Chancellor Palpatine was prepared to make an address to all of them. The news out of Naboo was spreading quickly. Civilians killed, Senator Amidala supposedly killed, and among the gathered Jedi was Anakin Skywalker. He was in denial about all of it. This wasn't possible. Padme would have told him if she were going back to Naboo, right? Unless it was a last-minute mission. But as time went on, and Padme never showed up, Anakin became more and more quiet. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka could feel his anxiety rising. They stood with him as Palpatine finally arrived to the Senate chambers. He spoke with a sad tone, proclaiming that something deeply unfortunate has happened on Naboo. Palpatine claimed that Senator Amidala was responsible for leading a violent riot against the brave clone troopers on Naboo in protest of the continuing war. Palpatine said that this dangerous riot killed many clones and many civilians, and the senator herself was killed as well. Palpatine proclaimed that these growing protests across the galaxy are turning more and more violent, and it's made him realize these worlds need more security, not less. More clone troopers must occupy these worlds to ensure that more radical terrorists, like Padme Amidala, cannot infiltrate their ranks. The crowd was growing louder in their confused, scared murmurs. But soon, a new pod would float to the middle. It was Bail Organa, Senator of Alderaan, and he proclaimed that he's just received something from a citizen of Naboo that was sent here by the senator. Anakin looked up to Bail's pod and saw a young woman who looked fairly similar to Padme. Palpatine tried to object to this, but Bail didn't wait for an answer. He would click play on the disc, and a hologram filled the Senate. All of the senators and the Jedi would watch the same horrific video of a young Palpatine slaughtering his family with the dark side of the Force. Anakin screamed out from his pod, calling Palpatine a liar, and the Jedi Council in attendance began igniting their lightsabers. Everything was happening so fast for Palpatine, and in moments, his pod was surrounded by Jedi, demanding he come with them. And so, he did, thinking he could win out in court, especially with Padme dead. Shortly after the massacre, Naboo was still mourning the many lives that were lost here. Smoke still hung in the air when Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka arrived, expecting only to retrieve Padme's body. Instead, clone Captain Herndon met them with the impossibly wonderful news. Padme Amidala is alive. After the fight, Herndon and the clones were rushing her to a hospital when they were found by the Gungans. The Gungans offered their help and were treating her wounds. When she finally emerged from the water, Anakin and her would embrace with everything they had, and she would come back to Coruscant. Palpatine would be locked inside of a Mandalorian vault that was used in the days of the Mandalorian Jedi Wars. It was the last one on Coruscant, held in reserve for a man like Palpatine. Inside of it, he cannot speak, move, or touch the Force, and it was Padme, still recovering, who faced the Senate and delivered the testimony that sealed his fate. The recordings of his crimes and her first-hand account of Order 37 would end it for good. The court ruled that he will be imprisoned in the vault for the rest of his life, and across the galaxy, the Separatist alliance would quickly collapse. Systems withdrew as soon as they learned what Dooku and Grievous were doing, that they were puppets of the same Chancellor they opposed. Grievous didn't know this, and he would soon cause a conflict that caused the death of both him and Dooku aboard the Invisible Hand, as the ship would be destroyed with both of them in it, fighting each other. In the coming weeks, Padme is elected Chancellor, almost unanimously. She became the face of a republic trying to rebuild. The clone troopers, horrified by what happened on Naboo, removed their inhibitor chips and began reclaiming their autonomy, many of them following Captain Herndon's example. Some would stay to help the rebuilding republic, others would scatter across the galaxy in search of lives beyond war. The Jedi left Coruscant as well, dispersing into the wider galaxy, but Anakin remained close to Padme, helping bridge former Separatist systems with reformed Republic worlds. Slowly, the galaxy was tilting back towards the light, and on Naboo, a monument was built in honor of those who fell. The planet was building back much stronger than before. And folks, that is our story for today. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. I always enjoy doing these what if Order, X was executed. I remember I started it many months, probably a couple years ago now, with, I think my most popular video actually, with what if Anakin executed Order 65. And I was like, this is creative. I was kind of full of myself there. I was like, yeah, no one's done this. And yeah, since then I've done 65, 66 with different people, 65 with different people. There's other orders that I've done. None of them, it's hard to find like canon ones. There's only a handful of canon ones. This one I think is Legends as well. All of them are just briefly mentioned, like in, books and stuff, but now it's fun to explore if, like, what if these orders were real? And yeah, I mean, this one's brutal. This one's violent. I mean, it's just, kill civilians, essentially. So, yeah. Wanted to go over something like that today. So, I appreciated you guys listening. Hope you enjoyed. And, yeah, thanks for listening. And I'll see you in the next video.